Hi, this is Becky Mitchell from the Becker County Museum. Welcome to today's Museum Roadshow. And joining me today is Lainey Clear. Lainey, tell us just real quickly, what is your role at the museum?
I am technically our program and event lead at the museum, which means that I have about 12 different hats that I wear. I kind of take the reins of things up in the Science Center, but also work on a lot of our events and our summer camp curriculums and do a lot of school thinking as well. So,
right. As with most nonprofits, we all have multiple hats and all other duties as assigned. That certainly rings true for you. Well, today you're joining me because there was a significant anniversary that happened in January in Becker County, Detroit Lakes specifically, and it's raised quite the ruckus. And so 70 years ago in January, we had a drowning on the lake. Now, if you look at papers of that era and that time frame, or any era really, drowning, people going through the ice happened, unfortunately, quite often. We still hear those stories today.
Yeah, it still happens.
Of course. But this story is interesting because this car is still there. It's still in the bottom of the lake. And there was a group of individuals, volunteers, that were kind of had a little bit of a mission to raise this car a week or so ago. And it creates quite the ruckus. And I think probably because some knew it was there. I think most don't know why it is still there, but many people didn't know it was there at all and never had heard the story. And so I think there's just a lot of curiosity about it. And so we thought we would kind of revisit that story today. So it's the McCabe brothers, Jack and James McCabe, were the individuals in the car. It's a 1935 Chevy. This happened in 1955, so 70 years ago. So it's a 20-year-old car, and they were driving on the ice. The story goes they were going out to visit a buddy that was out ice fishing and didn't see or went around, history is subjective. Everybody remembers it a little bit differently. Didn't see or went around the barricades to the ice harvest. And there had been a field that had been harvested the day before, and as it refroze, there was only a few inches of ice, so they went down. And so Jack was able to be rescued. Jim actually made it out of the car, was hanging onto some ice, and then slipped away kind of at the last minute. So very sad story, of course. But the real mystery is, why did this car not get taken out?
Yeah, because it's a pretty big deal to have a vehicle in the water. Today you have, 48 hours to get a vehicle out of the water if it goes through?
Right, exactly. And so it's interesting when we have stories like this, we try to see if anybody in the family is still living in the county or in the immediate area. We were not able to find anybody living immediately in Detroit Lakes or in the surrounding county area. However, since all of this kind of was stirred up, there have been some family members that have come forward, actually children of Jack's, that live in like Fergus Falls and Wyndmere, so not too very far away, and are actually going to be visiting the museum in the upcoming week. So
very cool.
That'll be great to kind of get their stories too. But the story goes, I actually reached out to Arvil Thompson, who was fire chief in Detroit Lakes for, ever, kind of, and just asked him if he knew about this story. And he actually knew quite a bit. So his dad at the time was fire chief, also was one of the supervisors on the ice harvest. And we should talk about the ice harvest just real quick. Just if you didn't know, ice harvesting happened in Detroit Lakes, Becker County, also, but Detroit Lakes as a business from the late 1800s all the way to 1971. And in the 1930s was actually the second largest business in Detroit Lakes. So it was
makes sense.
Quite profitable. A lot of farmers, of course, worked the harvest because they were off in the wintertime trying to find a way to provide for their families. And it was a really big deal. They harvested ice for the railroad, so the railroad could transport fruit and meat and what have you around the country. And of course, also harvested and then kept in the ice house houses ice to be used in homes and resorts and what have you in the summertime. So we've done lots of history on ice harvesting over the years, and the whole process is fascinating. But there's a real danger too. And so of course in this story, this car went down, and my understanding is that the car was traded into the Francis Peterson car dealership a few days before this accident happened. Jack happened to work at that dealership, and he had his mind set to buy this car. Okay. And so it's a little unclear if he'd already purchased it, if he was maybe just giving it the test drive and checking it out. We don't really know that part of the story. Again, this came from the mouths of others, if you will. And so when it went down, Wally Schultz's garage was all ready to pull it out, and everybody was kind of like, I'm not paying for it. Well, I'm not paying for it. And so they cut the rope, and there it has sat.
Yeah, because that tow garage actually hooked onto the vehicle, didn't they?
Right. So, so it's a sad story. You know, sometimes in your history, it's not always the fun stories, right, that we remember, but we certainly want to honor something that happened 70 years ago and these individuals. And just the effort. The firefighters actually, were the ones that kind of went out and rescued Jack that day. They did recover Jim's body. I think it was about 40 minutes later, but unfortunately it was too late. So.
Okay, so Detroit Lake is a pretty big lake. Whereabouts do we know where the vehicle is?
Yeah, my understanding is it's about a half mile out from the Holiday Inn. But when I say out from the Holiday Inn, what I mean is if you think of where the Holiday Inn is currently located, and then the lodge is kind of over here, and then there's that scenic outlook in between. If you took kind of the line and went, out from both of those, so half mile out from Holiday Inn and kind of came out this way from the lodge, that's where it is. It's only in about 11 feet of water.
Really?
So Jack, when he was able to get out of the car, got up on top of the car, and they could see his head sticking out in the water, and that's how he was kind of, my understanding is, waving them down, and that's how they were able to get to him. And he did have a family already at that time. He had, my understanding is there's 6 kids in that family, and the oldest one was about 5 years old at the time. And I recently spoke to her, and they knew of the story, but didn't really ever talk about it per se.
Understandable. I'm sure that was a very traumatic experience for Jack.
Of course.
So, Becky, this happened 70 years ago. How are people today just finding out about this then?
I mean, it's not that nobody knew about it. There are several people in our community that knew about it and know about it. My understanding is that it's quite the fishing hole today.
Makes sense.
But I know that Gary Thompson from Tri-State Diving did discover this vehicle about 20-ish years ago with a group of other divers at the time. And they had kind of they wanted to bring it up at that point. But he talked with somebody in the family that was still here. And she felt that, it's been there that long and let's just let it lie. And so they did. And I think it just kind of resurfaced as far as a idea to raise it because of the 70 years to kind of honor that story, honor that memory. And then coupled with the fact that there's, to our knowledge, not any immediate family living in Detroit Lakes or in Becker County. Now, since then, of course, as I've mentioned, we did find some family not too very far away.
Yeah.
But so it's not that there was no knowledge of the car. I think that it's a story that some people will say, my grandma's talked about this story, or my grandpa told us, or if you drive over it early in the spring before the weeds and everything starts to grow up, you can actually see it, and what have you. So it's not that nobody knew about it, but I think it's one of those, it's a painful story. So I think sometimes that just kind of, doesn't get talked about as much. So, well, Lainey, thank you for joining me on today's episode of the Museum Roadshow. We're looking forward. We're gonna kind of probably be seeing a little bit more of you on this show as we talk about other stories of Becker County and artifacts and what have you. And we look forward to visiting more of Becker County history.
Indeed we do.
Thank you for joining us.